Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into a super fascinating chapter of Qin history. We'll explore how three brothers took turns ruling after Duke Xian of Qin passed away. And in just over 2 decades, they managed to transform Qin from a chaotic state into a rising powerhouse. Now, let's get into the details. When Duke Xian of Qin died, the state hit a really rough patch. The records of the Grand Historian blames the turmoil on the fact that his successor was just a young kid. In ancient China, having a young ruler often meant trouble. With no strong leader in charge, the royal family, which was made up of close relatives of the ruling clan, started meddling in politics. They wanted to gain more power for themselves, and things quickly spiraled out of control. But here's the thing, Sima Qian, the historian who wrote the records of the Grand Historian, had a strong bias in favor of centralized power, especially the kind seen under Emperor Wu of Han. In the Han dynasty, Emperor Wu had a very strong central government that controlled a large area. Sima Qian thought this kind of system was the best. So, he tended to view periods of political instability as the result of weak leadership, rather than seeing them as natural growing pains of a rapidly expanding state. When a state expands quickly, like Qin did, there are bound to be some internal problems as it tries to manage all the new land and people. In reality, this kind of internal conflict was pretty much inevitable. Any state that suddenly expands its territory and racks up major military victories is bound to go through a messy adjustment period. Think of it like a small business that suddenly grows really big. It has to figure out new ways to manage its employees, resources, and customers. And that's exactly what happened in Qin: the struggle for the throne. At the time of Duke Xian's death, he had 3 sons. The eldest was 7, and the youngest, his 3rd son, was only 6. According to the records of the Grand Historian, Duke Xian had originally chosen his eldest son as his successor. But after he died, the powerful nobles of Qin, who happened to be his uncles, had a private discussion. In ancient Chinese society, especially in the noble families, uncles often had a lot of influence. They decided to ignore Duke Xian's will. Instead of letting the crown prince take the throne, they put his youngest son in charge and revoked the eldest son's title. This 3rd son became known as Duke Xian of Qin. Duke Xian ruled for 6 years, and during that time, Qin was a total mess. With no strong leader, the nobles took control. Each noble family wanted to carve out their own piece of power. It was complete chaos. Land disputes, power struggles, and endless infighting. You can imagine different groups of people in the state all fighting for their own interests. At this point, the aristocrats, who were the wealthy and powerful families, weren't thinking about Qin's future as a state. They only cared about their own personal gains, like getting more land, more servants, and more influence. Eventually, things reached a breaking point. In the 6th year of Duke Xian's reign, his older brother, the former crown prince, rose up in rebellion, overthrew him, and claimed the throne. This marked the rise of Qin's 5th ruler, Duke Wu of Qin. Duke Wu of Qin, a master of strategy. Duke Wu didn't just seize power, he played the nobles against each other like a master strategist. At that time, the biggest issue in Qin wasn't external threats from other states, but internal feuds between aristocrats. These feuds were mainly about who would control more land and resources. Duke Wu took full advantage of this. First, he supported one faction to eliminate 2 others. A faction is like a small group within the nobles that has its own interests. Then, once the first faction gained too much power, he flipped the script and allied with their enemies to wipe them out as well. In just a few smart moves, he took out 3 of the most powerful noble families and consolidated his control. By doing this, he made sure that he, as the king, had more power, and that the state was more united. With his authority secured, Duke Wu turned his attention to expansion. From the very first year of his reign, he was leading military campaigns. For the next 2 decades, he pushed Qin's borders further than ever before, stretching east to Huashan Mountain and west into modern-day Gansu. Huashan Mountain was an important geographical landmark in ancient China, and expanding to Gansu meant gaining a lot more land and resources. By the time he died, Qin was the undisputed ruler of the Guanzhong region, controlling even more land than the early Western Zhou dynasty. The Western Zhou dynasty was one of the earliest and important dynasties in Chinese history. Despite its large size, Qin's economy still lagged behind the Central Plains states. The Central Plains was the heartland of ancient Chinese civilization, with more developed agriculture, trade, and culture. But with vast amounts of land under its control, it had a crucial advantage: room to grow. With more land, Qin could have more farms, raise more livestock, and support a larger population in the future. A funeral that broke the rules. Duke Wu of Qin died after ruling for 20 years. We don't know his exact age, but he was probably in his 30s. If he had ruled for another few decades, his impact on history could have been even greater. He was a really important figure in Qin's development. But here's where things get really interesting: his funeral. According to historical records, 66 people were sacrificed in his burial ceremony. In the Zhou dynasty, human sacrifices were a common funeral practice, but the number of sacrifices was strictly regulated based on rank. In ancient China, there was a very strict social hierarchy. The higher your rank, the more elaborate and grand your funeral could be. Technically, Qin was still just an earl state. An earl was a noble rank in the Zhou dynasty's feudal system, and it came with certain rights and limitations. This meant Duke Wu shouldn't have been entitled to such an extravagant burial. The Son of Heaven, the Zhou king, usually had over 100 people sacrificed at his funeral. The Son of Heaven was considered the highest ranking person in the country, representing the will of the gods. By choosing the number 66, Qin was clearly pushing the limits of protocol. They didn't dare surpass the Zhou king's numbers, but they were making a bold statement. Qin was no ordinary feudal state anymore. They were showing that they were becoming more powerful and might not follow all the old rules set by the Zhou dynasty. Duke Xian of Qin, laying the foundations. After Duke Wu's death, the throne passed to his younger brother, the second son of Duke Xian. This succession rule was a Qin tradition at the time. When an older brother died, power passed to the younger brother, rather than to the next generation. This was different from the more common succession method in many other states, where the son usually took over from the father. Duke Xian of Qin ruled for only 2 years, but in that short time, he made several daring moves that set Qin apart from the other feudal states. He gave Duke Wu a burial that was way too extravagant for an earl state. In the rigid political system of the time, this was a direct challenge to the Zhou royal authority. The Zhou dynasty had a very strict set of rules about how different ranks should be treated, especially in important ceremonies like funerals. By giving Duke Wu a more elaborate burial, Duke Di was showing that Qin might not respect these old rules as much. He started appointing vassals of his own. Normally, only the Son of Heaven had the right to grant noble titles, but Duke Di ignored this rule and made Duke Wu's son a vassal. A vassal was a person who received land and protection from a higher ranking lord in return for loyalty and service. By doing this, Duke Di was acting as if he had the same power as the Zhou king, which was a big deal in the feudal system. He accepted gifts from envoys who served the Zhou king. In the rigid political system of the time, this was a direct challenge to the Zhou royal authority. Accepting gifts from the Zhou king's envoys was like saying that Qin was on an equal or even higher level than the Zhou king, which was not allowed according to the traditional rules. Duke Di knew exactly what he was doing. Qin was steadily breaking free from the Zhou dynasty's grip. The Zhou dynasty had been the dominant power for a long time, and Qin was now starting to show that it wanted to be independent and more powerful. Interestingly, Duke Day also introduced a new tradition, the Three Dog Days Festival. This was a religious and agricultural event held during the hottest days of summer. In ancient China, religion and agriculture were very important parts of people's lives. It marked a shift in Qin's focus. Instead of constant warfare, Qin began paying more attention to internal development, especially agriculture. In the Yellow River region, summer is a critical time for crops. The Yellow River is like the life, blood of ancient Chinese civilization, and the land around it was very fertile. Taking good care of the fields during this period could mean the difference between a good harvest and a disaster. If the crops grew well, there would be enough food for the people, and the state could store food for future use or trade. Another key achievement of Duke Day was officially establishing Yongcheng as Qin's capital. Located in what is now Fengxiang County, Shaanxi Province, this city became a crucial political and military hub. A hub is like a central point. Yongcheng was important for making political decisions, and also for protecting the state because of its good location for military defense. The Qin state's silent rise, thanks to the efforts of these three brothers, Qin went from a chaotic, fragmented state to a rising powerhouse in just over 2 decades. By the time Duke Day of Qin took the throne, the other feudal states were starting to take notice. Qin was different, bigger, bolder, and more willing to challenge tradition. And this rebellious streak would eventually become one of its defining characteristics, paving the way for its eventual rise to empire. In the future, Qin would continue to grow and change, and these early steps taken by these three brothers were really important for that development. That's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Qin history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more untold stories of the great Qin Empire.